70 years ago, the father of the welfare state, Sir William Beveridge, set out to eliminate what he called the 5 giants: want, disease, ignorance, squalor and idleness. The welfare state was considered a national treasure which gave a helping hand to those unfortunate enough to be born at the bottom. Now the government is planning to slash benefits and what it calls the culture of dependency. Well, many of those 5 giants are still there. But is Britain's welfare state about to collapse? Hello and welcome to A Simple Question with me, Phil Rees. Well, the government provides, amongst other things, unemployment benefit, free healthcare and child support. But if the well-off are now unwilling to assist the poor, what kind of society will Britain become? Well, before we find out what the public thinks here on the streets of London, here's a short video clip.
For years, Britain's welfare state was a source of national pride, a monument to decency and fairness, where the less fortunate were given a safety net if they fell on hard times. 7 decades later, however, the British public seemed to be changing their mind. According to a poll by YouGov for the monthly Prospect magazine, 74% think that the government should slash benefits. And 7 out of 10 Britons believe welfare provisions have created a culture of dependency. They also think that people should take more responsibility for their lives and families. The total number of unemployed who claim state benefits has reached 5 million, while 1.4 million of that figure have been receiving welfare for the last 10 years. Britain also has the most single parents of any major European nation. There are 600,000 who do not work and live off state benefits. In 1951, the government spent 4.7% of Britain's GDP on welfare. In 2011, that grew to 7.2% of the GDP. It seems that such dependency has become unacceptable to many taxpayers, who are increasingly reluctant to continue paying for the system. Newspapers like the Daily Mail regularly carry stories of fraudulent claimants such as Dr. Barbara Longley, who received more than £100,000 in benefits while also secretly getting a large pension and owning a Spanish holiday home. Even so, the turn against welfare is unprecedented. But the welfare system is breaking down at a time when recession makes it more important than ever. The Welfare Reform Bill 2012 has already been hailed as the most radical reform since the introduction of the welfare state. It plans to put a cap on families' benefits at £26,000 a year, however many children, dependents or disabled live in the family. It will also place the different benefits on offer, including unemployment pay, sickness and disability and housing benefits, into a single payment. The aim is to ensure that work will always pay better than any combination of welfare benefits. The bill has raised fears that millions of people will be squeezed out and the genuinely poor will suffer the most. Britain's richest 10% have become much richer over the past 3 decades, and an underclass has emerged. How will these changes in the welfare affect Britain? Will it create more social inequality? Will there be more social disobedience as the underclass are forced to beg or live on the streets? At a time of relentless cuts to public services and economic hardship, can Britain survive the disintegration of its welfare system?
A Simple Question is a show that finds out what the public thinks here on the streets of London. I began today by asking what people knew about Britain's welfare system and why so many in this country, that's 5 million of us, are claiming benefit.
It used to be said that it was from the cradle to the grave. It will be there to support you and look after you. And sadly, that is no longer the case, and it's all going to get worse.
What do you know about Britain's welfare system and what does it provide?
I think it provides support for vulnerable people. It provides, hopefully at the moment, a good national health system. It provides help for those people who are out of work through no fault of their own, all those sorts of things.
It seems to provide for just about anybody who asks for it, rather than people, and not necessarily the people that want it. Yeah.
Well, I think it provides for the unemployed, for the people who are perhaps below average wage, for the people with health problems, things like that.
What do you know about the British welfare state and who does it provide for?
Well, it obviously provides for those who can't provide for themselves, I guess.
I'm guessing it would provide for people who are largely underprivileged and wouldn't have access to money who generally would.
Why do you think that the numbers of people on benefit in Britain is 5 million? Now that includes everyone, including unemployment benefit.
I don't know. Well, I mean, I know unemployment's bad at the moment because of economic times, and I guess there's disability type issues as well, but I didn't realise the number was quite that high.
I think it's a problem in that people are not realising their full potential. Sometimes people are trapped into benefits because if they actually work, then they're going to be less well off.
Why do you think there are 5 million people who are now receiving benefits in Britain?
Well, for a start, there are 2.67 million people out of work, something like that. There are a number of people who are handicapped that, despite trying to find work, have not been able to. I think the main problem is if there were more job opportunities, then less people would be out of work and less reliant on handouts.
Maybe more people are unemployed now, and perhaps there are more people who come into the country who can't get work and so seek benefits.
I guess it depends on what they're claiming and what the state of the economy is at the time as well, how affordable it is. But people should be helped, but not those people who don't deserve to be helped.
Well, those were the views of the public here on the streets of London. Now let's find out what our experts have to say.
Well, fundamentally, it's supposed to provide financial support for people who are in difficult circumstances, whether that's being unemployed, having a disability or a long-term health problem, caring responsibilities, those kind of things. And it's supposed to provide a financial safety net to stop people being in poverty, basically. It's developed obviously over the years. I think it's a reflection of bigger societal issues. So you've got the unemployment levels, for example, around 2.6 million at the moment. And obviously that's a reflection of the labour market as much as it is anything to do with the social security system. You've got around 2.5 million people who have long-term health problems and disability, who encounter prejudice, difficulties getting into the labour market in the first place, and obviously they should be given support. You've got the people who care for those people, who help them with their day-to-day activities, who receive very little support actually from the state. So, you know, the system does actually deal with the people that it's supposed to deal with. Interestingly, two of the biggest beneficiaries are going to be, one, the technology companies, who I think the spend on technology to implement universal credit is something like £500 million on just the technology systems to get real-time reporting of income. The other big winners are welfare to work providers, people like A4E, Serco, who have got multi-million-pound contracts to try and get people back into work, despite the statistics showing that most people on job seekers allowance very quickly go back into work. 80% of new job seekers allowance claimants are back in work after 6 months. 90% are back into work after 12 months. And so the idea that there's lots of people on long-term unemployment, there is, but by far the most claimants get back into work. I do think there's general agreement that the benefit system could be simplified, and if the universal credit can pull off that trick, it could help people moving back into work with slightly more reassurance. But there are issues around the quality of decision making, for example, which do need to be improved regardless of the benefit system that sits around it. There's an awful lot of benefit decisions that are still going wrong, and that costs all of us a lot of money to put right.
We should aim for a welfare system to be as universal as possible. So rather than focusing on particular groups and stigmatizing certain members of society, we should try to extend it to every single person, and yet this is becoming increasingly difficult in this climate. The means testing and targeting will probably dominate our discussion of the welfare system in the years to come. The objective is to reduce the spending for the budget long term by providing people more incentive to work. And I think the reform is likely to achieve that objective. However, it's going to have a detrimental impact on those who cannot get sufficient work, and they're going to be required to work more hours a week in order to qualify for benefit. So instead of talking about those who are going to benefit, I think it's better to talk about those who are going to miss out and lose out. And there's an obvious group. It's lone parents who try to work more than 16 hours a week.
Well, many apparently believe that Britain's welfare system has created a culture of dependency where they have no incentive to work. But the government's Welfare Reform Act has also been criticised for ignoring the most vulnerable in our society. Well, let's find out what the public thinks here on the streets of London.
I think it does encourage people not to take the easy way out so that they can get something for nothing. They will. That's human nature. But I think so. I think it has contributed towards people not working for a living. Yeah.
It's claimed by the government that there is quite a culture of dependency in Britain. I mean, do you believe that's true?
I don't know. I mean, I only hear from other people. I don't know people who are dependent on benefits, but from what you hear, it seems that some families have got into that cycle where they've just never known anything else, which is very sad. I know there's a lot of good charity work going on to try and help break that cycle, and I think that's really important.
If you're going to get the same or more on benefits than going out to work because the employers aren't prepared to pay a decent wage, what would you do? You know, I know what I'd do. I'd keep to my benefits.
Not very much at all. If you go back to the period before the welfare system, the vast majority of British people suffered terribly when they were ill and when they were old. So if we want to go back to that system, I think most people would actually find it very unpleasant when they came to those points in their life if there wasn't some system supported by general taxation to deal with poverty, illness and old age.
Do you know about the new welfare bill that's going through Parliament, the 2012 bill, which basically will put a cap on the amount a family can get? It doesn't matter how many children they have. And it'll give one payment. So people who get disability and other payments, they could be penalised. I mean, do you think that perhaps the vulnerable in our society will cease to be protected?
I would say so, yeah. I think they will do, yeah. But I think the difficulty is we have to be practical about it as well. I mean, politicians have mismanaged the economies. It's a global thing, and I mean, we see what's happening in Greece at the moment, and the kind of austerity measures they've had to imply of being chucked out of the euro. So, but I would agree, yeah.
I think it's very difficult to cover everybody. I think elderly people possibly. I mean, they're probably the most vulnerable. I mean, I'm probably heading in that direction myself, but you know, it is difficult for people who are elderly and alone and perhaps in a home or something like that. I think they do need a lot more help, and it's just quite difficult to get it to them, I think.
Some people say that the government's reforms, you know, a cap on the amount people will have, will really damage the most vulnerable in our society, large families, for example. I mean, do you think there's enough concern for the vulnerable in our society?
I think right now, the government are just looking at their pocket now, yeah, which is like unfair, because there's some people that they don't, you know, they've tried as much as possible to provide for themselves, but you know, it's not possible. So I think those people, the government should like look into it and try and consider them as well, instead of just like trying to cut everything.
I don't know too much about that, but I certainly think that it is the most vulnerable that we should help at the moment, I think, particularly when times are hard. You know, times are hard for people in work, let alone for those people who can't find work. So yes, I think those should be the people who are helped. How, I'm not too sure.
Differing views there from the public. Let's find out now what our experts think.
There are issues around cliff edges. For example, people can work 16 hours and claim certain tax credits, and then they get more tax credits at 30 hours. Those kind of things can disincentivize people to increase their hours. People can, for example, lose 90 pence in every pound extra that they earn, which obviously mitigates against people wanting to do more work. And particularly, that's one thing that universal credit is trying to address, is to smooth that transition from lower amounts of hours into more hours and so on. But you know, for example, the earnings disregard for job seekers allowance is £5. Every pound above the £5 a week you earn, you lose from your benefits. That's been the same since about 1998. And so, you know, there are flaws within the system that stop people thinking about work. And also, to go back to the quality of decision making, if you've taken 6 months to establish an entitlement to a sickness benefit, the last thing you want to do is to trial a job for a few weeks when you may have a health condition which makes you think, I'm not sure whether I'm going to manage to continue in that job, if it's going to take me another 6 months to get my entitlement to benefit back again if I do need to claim again. So, you know, again, there are issues around the rapid reclaims of benefits, which I know government have tried to address, but I do think they could do more. I think there are concerns around the effects on women in particular. I think there are concerns from disabled people that reforms to the disability living allowance, which is going to be replaced by a personal independence payment, explicitly says we want to reduce the number of people claiming by 20%. Now, that to me is inherently saying we're just aiming to cut spend. We're not looking at addressing the extra costs that are associated with disability. Similarly, carers feel like they're not properly recognised within the system. And with 40% of decisions being successful on appeal against refusals around the new incapacity benefit employment and support allowance, that does kind of give concerns that this is just very blunt-edged tools to try and drive people off benefits rather than necessarily meaningful attempts to help people address the problems that they got and move back in and just closer sometimes to the employment market. Unfortunately, I think you could well see a rerun of some of the unrest we saw in the summer last year. You know, that was an awful lot of young people in particular, very dissatisfied with their situation. We know that youth unemployment is at record high levels. There's an awful lot of young people out of work. And, you know, people do need some hope and ambition within their life. The welfare system does need to enable people to kind of improve their circumstances. And I think, you know, we as a civilised Western country, we should be proud of the welfare state. We shouldn't be ashamed of it.
Any attempt to dismantle the welfare system would cause a big public outcry if it happened publicly in such a way that it would be noticeable. However, if the process is very piecemeal, I think it might just not be recognized for what it is. The welfare reform has an alleviating effect rather than being a proactive policy to boosting economic growth, if you like. So, I mean, I think that its impact can only be measured if the economy is healthy with a functioning labor market and you know, unemployment levels that are falling down. So the effects are secondary to these more important issues.
So what will happen if Britain's welfare state falls apart? Will there be more inequality, more beggars on the streets of Britain, protests, or even more riots? Or will the new law being discussed in Parliament reduce unemployment and help ease the economic crisis? Well, let's find out what the public thinks.
I think there'll be real social unrest and there will be much more crime and things will be very, very difficult, because if you've had a system and it's taken away, people will know what they used to have. If you grow up in a third world society where these things are not, you know, available, well then you don't know anything differently. But in our society, I think it will cause social unrest.
So what do you think will happen to Britain if the welfare system was taken away?
It doesn't warrant. Well, it does warrant thinking about. I think you're going to have a very divided culture. I think you're going to have a culture of people having to remortgage or sell their houses to go into care. But we've already got that anyway. I think you're going to have a culture of people, well, not to be too melodramatic, dying on the street, and people dying of illness, and a very selfish culture in which people in the short term will have money in their pocket. But anyway, that's a slightly false argument, because the government will spend your money however they wish to spend it anyway. But not good.
I don't think the welfare system should be done away with. I'm a great believer that any society needs a welfare system, as in any society should be supporting the arts, should be subsidising public transport, things like this. These are all key things that a good civil society operates on. and it's healthy to society, and there always has to be subsidy for things like this. And while there can be cutbacks, I don't believe at the moment that the cutbacks should be as severe as they're being proposed at the moment.
If the British welfare state, as it was once called, if that in some way collapses, what do you think the future shape of Britain will be?
It'll be a poorer country for many reasons. We are supposed to be a country that cares, and we are. I mean, if you look at the way we donate to good causes, we give a lot of money, so there are a vast majority of people who believe that we should support those who are less fortunate than ourselves. So I don't believe the country would collapse. I think it would be a very much poorer country if we didn't help those who need help.
Some of us believe actually the private sector might do things a lot better than the public sector does. Having a background in the public sector, I don't think we were very efficient. I think we wasted a lot of money, and it would be much better to get the private sector to do a lot more than it does now. The health service is a better example of that than the welfare system.
Do you think that the economy will be sorted out and that these cutbacks are needed for economic reasons?
Yeah, definitely the cutbacks are needed, and already there are signs of an upturn in the economy in a very small way, and these will gather pace, I'm sure, over the next year or two.
I think it's a contribution to debate. I think there's a whole framework, and I don't think it's something that can be done in 5 years. I think there's a 10-year programme for education, for benefit, for industry, for the economy, which is going to take a long time to work through, but we're on the right track to do it.
The government says that these, as it were, reforms in their language, these cutbacks are needed in order to solve economic problems, and then in the future, there'll be a bigger cake to chop up. Do you agree with that?
There's a credit crisis that we owe a lot of money, but to my way of thinking, the way to deal with that is not to make huge cuts that kill the patient rather than cure the patient. If you look at what some other countries are doing, Germany, for example, I don't think is cutting nearly as much, and they are growing. We are not growing. The way to get out of the debit crisis is to grow and put money into it. Cut where it's waste, where waste is taking place, as it undoubtedly is. But that waste is often in government itself, not necessarily in the welfare system.
I think it'll make a difference in a negative way. I don't think that's a way of addressing the problems that are in the British economy. I think it's far too loaded towards helping people who already have an awful lot. And some of the things I read about I think are absolutely disgraceful.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. If you've got something to say yourself, send an email to asimplequestion@presstv.com. That's asimplequestion@presstv.com. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.